In this lesson, we'll learn how to convert a high-resolution photo into a vector painting using image trace. Okay, so I've got the Lesson 3 Begin file open here in front of me, and I've got in here a file placed, again from our referenced file folder. It's called chicago.jpg. This was actually taken on a trip to Chicago that I was on. So let's say that for whatever reason, maybe it's a layout we're working on, or maybe even a poster, we want to take a photograph like this and give it a bit more of a painterly feel. Now, this is a relatively high resolution photograph, and you can see if we jump over to the info panel, what the resolution of that is. But this is actually about half of the resolution that this image originally was coming off of the camera. Now, for your own uses, you might consider just downsizing the resolution of your images if you're going to go through this process, because a higher resolution image can cause the image trace conversion to actually hang and become a little bit cumbersome, as you'll see here as we kind of get into this. So let me go ahead and just access the image trace panel here. Now, when it comes to actually converting this into sort of a painterly type of a feel, we can actually zoom in on this and see that there is a lot of really nice detail captured in this image. So it really depends on how much of this detail we want to actually show up in our final tracing. So let's go ahead and choose a preset here to start from. I'm going to go ahead and we'll go ahead and make sure that preview is checked here. And you can see Illustrator goes through the process of generating the default preset for us. So we already know that's not going to work. This is giving us sort of a black and white result. So let's come over here and choose something maybe like 3 colors here. And you can see when I choose that, Illustrator is going to go through the process of actually giving us this image trace preview. Now, again, considering this is a half resolution image, it's still taking a little bit of time to actually generate this preview for us. So as you can see, that basically every time we make a change over here in the image trace panel with this preview option checked, it's going to go through that process of recalculating and regenerating the preview. So this can become kind of cumbersome. Now, as far as this result, you can see here that it's generated this result and it only uses 3 different colors here. Now, it's using some of the colors in the image, and not only is it simplifying the image's detail, but it's also simplifying the colors that we're using to a very limited palette, in this case 3 colors. But if this is the style of painting you're wanting to go for, almost maybe a kind of a cutout look, then this is exactly how you would do it. You would just go ahead and start with that 3 color preset. Now again, we can come in and modify this preset any way we'd like to. Let's say we wanted to do a little bit more as far as the colors go. Now I'm going to make this change and pause the video so you don't have to sit and watch as Illustrator recalculates this, but let's go ahead and say we wanted to maybe drag this up to maybe about 10 colors. And once Illustrator finishes calculating that, you can see here what our preview looks like now with 10 colors. You can see that because of the increase in the number of colors in our result, we're starting to capture a bit more of that detail here. So you can see here things like shadows are starting to come into focus a little bit. We're seeing a bit more of these people underneath the bean. Even the detail in the buildings is starting to come through a bit more. Now, at this point, we've made a change to our preset that we started with. Now, if we come over here and check, you can see my preset no longer says 3 colors. It actually says custom now, because we've actually made a change to the preset. So now again, depending on kind of what your creative vision is for the end result, maybe you want it to have a little more realistic color. Let's come in here and change our preset and start with something, let's start with something like low fidelity photo. And once Illustrator finishes that generating that preview, you can see here kind of what it's looking like with this low fidelity photo preset. Now, there are some advanced options above and beyond what we already see here in the image trace panel available to us. Let's go ahead and click on this little arrow here next to the advanced option, and you're going to see quite a bit more that kind of expands down. Now, at this point, I want to focus just specifically on these first 3 sliders here. You can see we have paths, we have corners, and we have noise. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about paths first. Now, when Illustrator is generating this result, it's looking at all the different details in the image that we're tracing. It's looking at the shapes as well as the pixel data. So the way it generates these shapes, let me just click away and zoom in here. You can see here for the windows, for example, some of these it's creating individual shapes. Some of these, it's actually kind of creating more of a merged shape. So what it's doing is it's examining the pixels that we're tracing, and it's finding shapes to build based on that information. Now, the path setting here, let me click on the image again. The path setting, you see it has a low and it has a high, and the default is at 50% for this preset. Every preset's going to make a little bit of change to some of these settings, but for this preset we're at 50%. So basically what that means is that we're controlling how the paths that are generated fit to the details in the image. Either they're going to have a tighter fit, or they're going to have a sort of a looser fit. So let's say for this example, let's just zoom out and kind of take a look at our result here. We've got a pretty loose fitting of these details. Maybe we wanted a little bit more accurate recreation of the details. Now we can achieve that simply by dragging this path slider to the right so that it's kind of towards this high setting. So let me just go ahead and drag this up from 50%, and I'll just drop it at about 75% here. And I'll go ahead and click on this preview button down here so we can actually preview those changes. And when Illustrator finishes, you can see here that we've actually increased the detail that is being represented in this tracing based on the change to the paths. We're getting a little bit more accurate representation of that detail here based on that setting. Now, that's not the only setting that's going to affect that. Now, if you have worked inside of Illustrator before, you know about anchor points. You know that we have smooth anchor points and we have corner anchor points. And those dictate kind of how the shape is viewed. Let's look at these windows here in this building, for example. So if we look at some of these shapes up close, you can see that we have a relatively smooth corner here. We basically are not going to have a corner that is sort of at a 90-degree angle here. And this is going to be affected by this corners slider. So basically we can tell Illustrator in this tracing result to have more or less corners in the result. So more corners is going to probably result in a little bit more accurate tracing. Whereas less corners, we're going to have smoother shapes, and so probably more of a stylized result. So let's go ahead and kind of ramp up maybe the corners. Right now we're at 50%, and if we were to take that up to maybe say 75%, just like so, you should start to see more and more sharp edges, more and more corners being represented here in the tracing result. Now 75% may actually not be quite enough, so let me just ramp that up to 100% for us here. Go ahead and just dial that all the way up. And let's go ahead and take a look at our tracing result here. I will just show the outlines with that here. You'll see here now with those corners ramped all the way up, you're going to see more corners like this one right here. More sharp corners as opposed to smoother corners like this one here. So that's the corner setting. There's one last setting I want to go over in this lesson. So let me switch back over to our tracing result here. And this has to do with the noise that our image has. So if we were to kind of look at the original image again, just by clicking on this eyeball, you'll notice that these aren't clean buildings. These buildings actually have quite a bit of dirt on them. So if we were to come in here and look at this again, you'll notice here that there's lots of sort of noise that is really kind of dirt, maybe just build up over the years on these buildings. But we actually are missing out on a lot of that here. So you can see here that we have a noise slider though, and it currently has sort of a pixel value that is being used in its calculation of noise. So the pixel value simply refers to the smallest pixel area that's going to be traced. So right now it's only picking up on a 10 pixel area. Now, if we wanted to slide that up, we could further simplify our image by telling it maybe, let's say about a 50 pixel area. And once Illustrator finishes, you should see kind of a further simplification of the tracing result here. So now let's go ahead and go the opposite direction. Let's go ahead and slide this all the way down. Let's go ahead and turn that noise all the way down to 1 pixel. And with that done, you should be able to see now a little bit more of that detail that was being omitted originally starting to show up inside our tracing result. Now, ultimately, the colors slider is probably going to be one of the most important sliders in terms of capturing detail. You can see we still have that relatively low. So again, depending on exactly what kind of outcome you have in mind in terms of a painting, would dictate kind of the way you set up your image trace here inside the image trace panel. Again, using the workflow of choosing a preset to start with, and then beginning to come in and change the settings for the tracing result based on kind of what you end up wanting to see. So in this lesson, we've learned how we can turn a high resolution photo into sort of a vector digital painting. And in the next lesson, I want to go ahead and move forward and take a look at a little bit different type of image. We've been looking at photos for these first 2 examples, but in the next lesson, I want to kind of take a look at maybe a sketch. Maybe you're a traditional illustrator and you've scanned in some line work that you've sketched. Let's go ahead and learn how we can take a sketch or just a simple illustration and convert that over into vector information here inside of Illustrator.